Welcome again to this presentation. I want to thank our presenters, the main two presenters came all the way from Washington, D.C. just to be with us. So, without further ado, I would like to bring up our NYAHMA board president, R. Hunter Cushing.
Good morning, all, and welcome to a seminar. This is our first open seminar we've had in this fall. We take a sabbatical during the summer because we think most people are out. A couple of weeks ago, we were very fortunate to have John Rea, the chairman of the New York City Housing Authority, who agreed to talk to our board and certain invited guests about the entrepreneurial efforts that he is doing. This organization, NYAHMA, is an organization of 300 members representing 90,000 units of HUD-associated housing in the New York area, the New York hub area, which is Westchester and Long Island. And we have two main purposes. One is to be the central focus of the dialogue between the regulators on one hand, whether it's HUD, or HCR, or HPD, or NYCHA, anything else, and the owners and operators of affordable housing. And we work very hard with a core group of 5 of our board members who meet with HUD or the CGI, which is our contract administrator, quarterly. We'll also meet on an as-needed basis with the various other regulatory agencies. I had a meeting Monday, it was Monday, with the head of the voucher program at NYCHA. NYCHA has about 85,000 vouchers, and many of our owners and operators use those vouchers extensively. And there are big changes in the voucher program and the way NYCHA is going to be more user-friendly. So Kathy Pennington was very nice and hosted 2 of us with her staff. And not only that, she agreed to come and have a seminar for our members. And in fact, Greg has just taken off on around December 4th. She's going to have a seminar probably right in this room with her head of HQS and her deputy, who's redone this whole website kind of thing. So that's one of the kinds of services we provide. The other one is where you are today. It's education. Years ago, Deborah Vandermungen, who really spearheaded this when she was at HUD, realized that the federal government didn't have the capacity to really get messages out and wanted to spur on an organization that could be flexible in doing the things, getting out the messages, getting out their policies that needed to get out in a quicker method than they could, and really came to David Buckwalter and a couple of us and said, don't you have an idea of how this could be? And NYAHMA is the end result of this. And we're always thankful for her because we think it's been good. And we try and talk about topics that are of interest to you. We take your feedback of what is of interest to you, or we are out there looking for things that we think you need to know. And we try and have monthly seminars except for the summer. So we have about 8 or 9 seminars a year. And I think Greg on the table has kind of a tentative list of what they're going to be through June, after which we all go on vacation and take a sabbatical. Something that I'm going to be bringing up to the board at our meeting next week, I think that we're going to be getting into is a little more public awareness or advocacy. We have been very fortunate these last 24 years to have very entrepreneurial leaders here in New York. That appears to be changing. And I think that we are all in the business of affordable housing and doing a great job, whether it's assisted housing or public housing. Some of our members manage public housing. That we think that we provide even a better service, if I may say, than the public sector can on their own. And I think we want to make sure that there's a place for us, continues in New York, to be a place for us in managing and owning and taking advantage of the affordable housing programs. And from things we've read, that may be changing, and I think we have to be ready and ahead of the curve. Luckily, I spent 18 years in Washington. I'm going to try and form an alliance like they do down there with the other affordable housing groups here in New York, and we've got a couple that are very active. Greg is more of I'm really a Washingtonian type. That's the way I think from the federal level. We're very lucky that our executive director takes the exact opposite view that I do and is very New York City centric. I try and pretend I wasn't born here. But he knows those things, the city council and sewer issues and those local issues. But there are others. There's the New York Housing Conference, which is very active, which is an affiliate of the National Housing Conference. It's an umbrella group of everybody. And there's NYAHMA, which is really a developers association and tax credits more than the owner and operator. So our staff is going to be very busy with them to try and have some kind of alliance so we can speak out and get ahead of the curve with what I'm afraid is going to be coming here in New York in January. That is why you should join, because our power, when I go into a meeting, it doesn't matter who it is, I start off by saying I represent 300 owners and managers of 90,000 units. That is my power, not because I can speak well or jobs I had before in Washington. That is why they come to breakfast. That is why they make time to see me in their offices. We need you to join. We need you to be active. That is how we are going to prevent or make sure what may be on the horizon or try and change it is through your membership. Greg has membership applications. If you're not a member, please join. It can be a project expense. So certainly if you're a limited dividend, it costs you nothing. It costs you nothing at all. So please join and see Greg if you're not a member. If you are, thank you for your membership. You make our job a lot easier. The issue you've had today, you're going to talk about today, is in one of those really important issues. I mean, I don't think there's any issue at HUD that is more important than your ticket to do business at HUD. Because without your 2530, you're out of business. It's as simple as that. One way or another, you're going to be out of business. And the people, and HUD takes this very seriously. Now, I know that HUD has been talking about changes to 2530 for years. It is going to come up with, if any of you know, the pet rule and how long that took to get out. But Washington recently had a big seminar of about 15 law firms and consulting firms and 6 members from HUD, including Jim Van Kirk, who's the head of management, asset management, who's the big leader in this, and this is really end news. It is on September 17th, to try and coalesce this group of interest groups, come up with a list of issues which they said had to be resolved. And you know what? You're really lucky, because one of the panelists, Denise Murphy, who's on this list of attendees. So she was there, and I'm sure she'll have something, I don't know, but I mean, maybe she'll refer to that. I don't know if it's part of her presentation, but I was called by someone last week when they saw Greg's announcement from Washington and said, Hunter, you can't have this seminar without knowing this went on. So I want to tell you about it, and I want you to be aware of it. So without further ado, I would like to, it's now 5 of 9, all right? Now you're ready to go. One of our board members, we have a nice active board member, no one is more active than David Buckwalter, who you know, I'm always pleased to announce because he's a fellow HUDite. And he also ran asset management in the New York hub forever. I don't remember exactly the number of years, but it seemed like forever. And since then, we are very fortunate that he kind of was my co-sponsor of this organization and getting it off the ground. And I'm always pleased to do anything with David. And he has arranged this conference. And so without any further ado, David, why don't you take the mic?
Well, good morning. We're very lucky in a sense. One of the good things about the government shutdown is the fact that when we talk about certain sensitive issues, such as problems with 2530 and flags, people tend to be very cautious about what they say. Normally when we have meetings like this, there are at least a half a dozen HUD folks at the meeting. But thanks to the shutdown, there is absolutely nobody from HUD in this meeting today. Now what that means is, when we get into our questions and answers, You can actually ask real questions. You can make believe that the issue is, and I'll steal something from Denise, you can make believe the issue is not yours, but a friend of yours or a colleague or whatever. That's up to you. But you can be open and honest, because there ain't nobody here from HUD. And I promise you they're not going to get a copy of this recording that we're making now. We're very lucky to have two excellent panelists. Denise Murphy-Edwards is the principal of Murphy Consulting. I suspect some of you may be her clients already. She is the expert on secure systems, on apps, on how to get information into apps, how to interpret the information, how to fix apps, anything related to the secure systems. Denise knows how to do that. She'll be our first speaker. I'll then take a few minutes to talk to you about the flag situation from a consultant's perspective, and I suspect from your perspective as well. And then finally, we have Lisa Tunick, who is one of the best attorneys out there. I've known Lisa for a number of years. She used to be with Hessel and Alois, which is, or now it's Hessel, Alois and Noonan. She was one of their top, you were a principal there, I believe, were you not? Specializing in compliance issues. Before that, she was an attorney with the Housing Division?
With HUD. Yeah.
With HUD in the Housing Division down in Washington. She now has her own firm, Tunick Law, LLC, and she specializes in just the issues that we're talking about, compliance issues. She does a lot of other stuff as well, but her specialty, as far as I'm concerned, is dealing with issues of this nature that we're going to be talking about now. So when we do get to the question and answer period and a discussion period, I really urge you to raise questions, talk about situations and issues that concern you, maybe talk about something that's happened to you and get our experts' take on it. So this is a great opportunity to do just that without HUD listening. So with that, Denise?
So really what are HUD flags is really the meat of what we're talking about today, and what to do about them and how to not get them and all of that kind of stuff. I had a client that called me up and he said, I'm trying to get this approval and I have this flag and I don't even know what it's for. And I called the local field office and they said, well, you know, this project was horrible and these people handled it poorly. And I said, but the guy didn't even work at this company when you placed the flag. He'd been gone 3 years. We're not taking it off because these people did not take good care of this property. So I called HUD headquarters and I said to Devazia Criminal at HUD headquarters, I said, Devazia, you know, this guy's trying to get an approval. Can you please do something about this flag? It doesn't even belong on his record. And he says, oh, Denise, I do not know why people get so upset about flags. They are just warning signs. It doesn't mean you can't get an approval. And we all know reality. That's not reality. It is a warning sign. HUD means it as a warning sign to let them know to stop when they're doing it in the 2530 approval or going to approve an owner or an agent, to stop and take a look a little bit more closely. They mean it as a warning sign, but we all in the room, if you've had a flag on your property, know that sometimes it really can be much more problematic than that. So we're going to talk to you today about the types of flags, how to avoid them, you know, how to get them cured, and what you can do in those circumstances. So who places your flags? Your friendly little HUD project manager. You're going to hear each of us talk today, this morning, about your relationships with your HUD field office staff. Because really a lot of this is about relationships. The example that I gave you in the very beginning was a field office where they didn't have, that owner didn't have a good relationship with the field office and had really treated them poorly. So anyone calling about that property or that flag was going to get just a big fat no from HUD. They didn't want to hear the background on it. So it really, a lot of this is about your relationships. Yes, it's also about performance and all of that, but if HUD knows you're working on it and considers you a partner in curing these things, you're always in a much better place. So you hear terms, 2530 flag, apps flag, HUD flag. Okay, these all mean the same thing. The HUD 2530 form, for anyone in this room that doesn't know, is HUD's previous participation form that you need to have owners and managers approved to do new business with HUD. If you also are getting a refinancing, you're going to have to be reapproved through 2530 with HUD, even if you're the existing management agent staying on that property. Okay. During the processing of the 2530, HUD is looking for critical findings. Critical findings come from a number of different places, but some of them are also flags. There's been an increased focus in recent years on the 2530 compliance. At management occupancy review, you see HUD sometimes going back and double checking the 2530 at rent increase, contract renewals. And you're seeing a huge increase across the country in HUD annually looking at the 2530s for nonprofits, given any nonprofits in the room. Looking at the nonprofits to make sure that they've stayed in compliance. Because folks that know 2530 know that if you have any changes to the parties that were approved on the 2530, you have to get those new incoming parties and those changes approved. And that applies a lot to nonprofits, because how often does the board turn over? There's new board members probably every year in most nonprofits that I deal with. Okay? But also, let me tell you, for-profit folks, that if you've done some estate planning at your company and you've decided to put your ownership interest in your management company into a trust, that is a change. That's a new organization you pulled into a previously approved entity. That requires 2530 approval also. Let me tell you a quick story about what the folks in Florida in HUD office are doing. They're actually going to the SunBiz website every year. They're checking the names of the officers that the nonprofits that own their affordable properties have listed there each year, because it's required to be updated with SunBiz every year. And then they're going back and pulling the 2530s to make sure that they have approved all the people that are showing up on SunBiz. Sounds like a lot of work. Sounds like HUD should have a little bit more important stuff to do with their time, but they don't. They have made this a priority. Okay, I haven't heard anyone in New York doing it yet, okay, but in Florida they have that system that has it readily available for them online, so they really are after folks. So you have to be careful. A lot of folks go, well, I have a nonprofit and I haven't done any updates to my nonprofit 2530 in about 5 years and HUD's never noticed. Well, that's kind of like when you're speeding and you pass the cop and you go, oh geez, he must not have noticed I was going 10 miles over. And the next time you go by him doing the exact same speed, he pulls you over, like, darn, you didn't get me last time. Doesn't mean he couldn't have. So you want to really be careful. You want to stay on top of your stuff. So when you're doing a 2530 review, there are critical findings that they're looking at. And some of these are HUD flags. We're going to go through what the others are also. But I want to tell you, anybody here in this room that has access to the HUD secure system for their property, whether that is for EIV, whether that is to assign roles to the auditors for the financial assessment, annual filing requirement, has access to look at a flag report for that property. They might not know they have access. They might have to click a few extra additional buttons to get the access, but they already have access that they can get to in about 5 minutes. Because in that app system, there's a flag report. So on your 2530, they're going to go through and they're going to look at your Schedule A, list of previous participation, and they're going to be looking at any unsatisfactory or below average MORs, any failing REACT inspections, that's under 60, even if they don't have flags, any loan defaults. They're going to look at the certifications on the 2530 to see if you've answered false to any of those certifications. And then they're going to run a flag report. Those are the list of critical findings that they're looking for in the 2530. Not all of these items up here result in a flag. Okay, so we're talking about HUD flags today, but if you're also looking at the bigger picture of 2530 approval, know that it's not just the flags, which are the critical findings. There's also these semi-critical or non-critical findings that HUD reviews that may slow up your 2530 as well. So as I said, the good news and there's bad news about flags. The bad news is that HUD is not required to notify you when you get a flag. Sometimes people get notified. Sometimes HUD sends out a letter and tells you, you've been doing bad things. It's because they want it on record that they notified you. So when you come back and say, I didn't know I was supposed to fix that. But they're not required to notify you. And the good news is that you can go into apps and run a flag report yourself and find out. Okay? There was something else I was going to tell you about on the slide, and it just went totally out of my brain, and I will remember later, and I'll plug it in there. So, as I said, if you have access to apps, you can run your own flag report. Anyone in here have a login to the HUD secure system for any reason at all? Okay, those of you that don't, you need to go back to your office and find out who does, right? So that we have handouts. I'll mention really quick, because I see people taking notes. We've got handouts on a disc that'll have these slides, you don't have to write this stuff down, okay?
I'll put them outside.
Okay, great, they're right now. The coordinator assigns the rights, they can assign it to themselves, they can assign it to a user, and they can go in and run a flag report. If they just go in and run the flag report without doing the first piece, then the flag report will come up with a false reading, okay? So you have to be really careful to do both of those steps, but it is on the disc. I'm going to go through a number of the more common flags that we see in the system, how they end up there, and a little bit about what you can do about them. David's going to go into a more operational look at them. Lisa's going to go into a more legal look at them. Okay. This flag, failure to file financial statement. This is the one that you will get an email telling you something. It doesn't tell you you have a flag. If anyone's ever gotten an email that said your financial statements are late and overdue, you already have a flag on that property. This is an automatic system-generated flag. Exactly 10 business days after your financial filing is overdue, the system will automatically generate an email that goes out to the coordinator that's assigned in the system, telling them that it's overdue. You already have a flag at this point. Okay? This must be resolved by a HUD staff person. When you go in and do the filing, it doesn't automatically resolve the flag. It automatically places the flag, but it doesn't automatically resolve the flag. We've asked HUD to please code that differently and fix it. And maybe someday they will, but don't expect it this year or next year. Okay. You have to just do the filing and then contact your HUD project manager, your friendly HUD project manager that you have a good relationship with, right? And say, hi, we filed a little late. It's filed now. Can you please resolve the flag? And then give them a couple days because they're busy, okay? They have other stuff to do than to go in and fix the mess you made because you weren't quick enough getting your financials in, okay? Give them a few days. Check the system, see if the flag is still there. If it's not, send them an email. Hey, I know you're busy, but when you get a minute, can you please go in and resolve this flag? Okay? It's one that gets people mad when they see this flag, but it's really, really easy to fix if you have in fact done your filing. Okay. Unacceptable physical condition, that would be your failing REACT scores. Okay? HUD came out with a new protocol 2 years ago. I'm sure you all know about this because REACT's a hot topic. David can tell you all about this. The first time failed REACT is not an automatic flag now. This is great, great news, but 6 months after HUD came out with that memo saying that you don't automatically get a flag for the first time fail, they realized, okay, we have no incentive for people to fix the stuff they just failed on. So they came out with a second memo that said, okay, you don't get an automatic flag for the first time fail now, but you then have to also fix the property and give us a physical report showing that you've made corrective action. And if you don't, you're going to get a flag for that first time fail. So they realized they were a little too broad and too lenient in just saying, hey, no flag for the first time. It can be resolved by the HUD project manager at their discretion or after a subsequent passing REACT. What does that mean if you're a management company and you were managing a property for a landlord that you didn't like, that wasn't taking good care of the property, and you said, you know what, I'm done dealing with this guy. This property needs, or gal, sorry. This property needs a lot of work. They're not letting us have the funds to fix it up. I don't like the way the residents are having to live, and I don't want to be any part of this, and you walk away. What if that property failed its REACT physical inspection last month? What if you didn't turn in a physical condition report identifying what you had fixed, and that score stays? You leave as the management company. Do you get to have the flag taken off because you're not the management company anymore? Nope. You also don't have the opportunity of being there when there's a new passing REACT so that you can get that score taken off of your record. That stays as a permanent part of your record. Okay? This is where, as a management company, it becomes even more increasingly important that you have that good relationship with the HUD field office. If you think this property is going to fail, talk to your project manager in advance. Tell them your situation with the owner. They may well take that, not place a flag on you because they know that you're doing everything that you can do, okay? But it's about relationships. One of the things, and they did mention earlier, I was at that meeting at HUD to go over 2530 regulations. It was a great productive meeting. We were there with them at the decision maker level at HUD, which was wonderful. They seemed very, very receptive to everything that the group was saying and asking for. And one of the things that the group was asking for was much more clear identification in writing from HUD about their policies and practices for placing flags and for resolving flags, okay? And especially this kind of situation where you're like, I didn't do anything, I did everything I could, how do we handle that? You know, what steps can we take? So HUD really was listening. They went, oh yeah, I guess, you know, there isn't really anything that's comprehensive that helps the folks in the industry understand what they can do and should do. So they actually intend to come out with that. I will say, and Hunter mentioned, you know, we know how long it takes sometimes for HUD to take any action on something. The folks in the room from HUD said they were committed to getting the 2530 regulations updated within the next calendar year. There was continued discussion from some of the folks in the room saying, well, you know, if you don't get that, can you come up with some memos to help us that give us a little bit more information and clarity? And they said, well, we may be able to do that, but we really, really think we're going to get the new regs out in the next calendar year. So we're all hoping. That'd be really, really great. But they did say that they were very committed to it. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. One other thing, and David does a lot of appeals for folks, Lisa does a lot of REACT appeals for folks around the country. If you get a score below 60, please appeal. Appeal, or at least contact someone that does appeals to see what they think that your possibilities are for getting back those extra 3, 5, or 10 points. Okay, so that you're not below that 60. That magic number is 60. Another flag that we see is unsatisfactory management review. There was a huge problem with the PBCA contracts not getting renewed and going to that shortened work schedule where folks aren't getting new MORs, right? Some folks are happy, yay! Some folks are frantically staying up and staying in compliance as much as they can because any day now that could change and MORs could come back and they don't want to be caught. What happened to the folks that had the unsatisfactory MORs that fixed their issues and are anxiously awaiting the new MOR so they can get this bad score off their record? They can't get a new MOR. So the last score on their record is the unsatisfactory MOR, okay? What I have been seeing HUD do across the country is taking those flags off people's records because they understand that the property, you know, has fixed its issues, it's turned in its report, and is vehemently saying, we know we can pass, but nobody will give us an MOR. That's the only time where I'm seeing HUD be fairly liberal during this PBCA contract. I want to say renewal, but it's really a fight. I'm also seeing a huge increase, not just in Florida, I'm seeing a lot of these in Florida, flags for false or incomplete 2530. That's where HUD has realized you didn't update something you were supposed to update, typically nonprofits not doing their board members, but also sometimes management companies say, you know, giving 50% of their ownership to their son or daughter in the company as part of their estate planning or putting things in trust, things like that. It's failure to obtain any new approval. Occasionally I'll see that if someone transferred the ownership of the property or created a new management company with the same principles but didn't go through all of the work with HUD to get the new management. It is a new management company. If it's a new company name with a new tax ID, it's a new management company, even if the ownership is entirely the same as the one you had before. Okay? So I have seen a flag of that nature recently. This is my favorite flag. Okay, what does this flag mean? What did you do to get this flag? Anybody?
Anything?
What did you do? Any guesses?
Bad relationships.
You're not allowed to answer. You know the answer. This means you did not make friends with your HUD project manager. You usually see this flag when they have gone, now flags are a drop-down menu for HUD in their system. And when they go down the list and they go, I'm gonna give them this, what else? I gotta give them something else, I'm mad at them. Oh, and here, this, okay? Usually you don't see this flag by itself. Usually you see regulatory agreement violations or maybe false or incomplete 2530 where the person didn't bother to go and fix that and it's been going on and on and on. This is when HUD is mad at you, okay? Don't get one of these flags. I had a client, am I good on time, David? I'm watching, I got about 5 more minutes?
Fine.
Okay. I had a client out in the Midwest who called me up and said, you know, we've been managing properties for 40 years. My dad ran the company. He died 5 years ago. I came up, as a woman, I came up through the company. I was the leasing agent in high school and then a property manager and then a regional and now she's running the company, right? Nice woman, good mission, small handful of affordable housing projects. Some of them haven't been rehabbed in a very long time. Trying to get loans now to do some rehab so the residents are living in better conditions. Altruistic, good, you know, good lady. The problem is when she took over the properties, when she took over the property management company, she thought, wow, this company, it practically runs itself. Well, we all know HUD properties don't run themselves. There was a lot of stuff that her dad was doing that she had no idea in the day-to-day managing and operating of the company. So a lot of stuff went by the wayside. And every time HUD would call up and go, you know, you didn't do this and you need to do that, she'd go, hey, are we doing that? Oh, yeah, we're doing that. We're doing that. I don't know why they're calling me. And she didn't really follow up with them. Okay, so they got mad at her. So by the time she came to me, she had a flag report with a whole bunch of stuff on it. And she had this one, non-compliance with any HUD obligation. And she goes, well, I know what this flag is for because we failed to react. And I know what this flag is for. It's the MOR, and we didn't give them the documentation in time. And I know what this, but I have no idea why she gave us this one on this project. So I called up the HUD project manager and said, now they're mad at me because 4 other people called before I ever called. Because usually, you know, we all know we don't get called, especially not Lisa, until after everyone's tried everything else, okay? And they've already talked to HUD 8 times and HUD's already mad at them. So I call up and they don't want to talk to me right away at first. It's okay. I'm not trying to talk you into anything. I'm not trying to talk you out of anything. I just have a question. Okay. What's this flag for? Well, they had a below average MOR. Like non-compliance and then HUD obligation for a below average MOR. Well, below average MOR isn't a flag reason, and I wanted to give them a flag for it. So HUD was clearly mad. Now actually in the drop-down menu you will see below average MOR. It's actually been added as a flag reason, but it wasn't there at the time. So truly these relationships that you're making with HUD and following up with them and all of that goes a really long way to not getting flags in certain circumstances and to getting flags lifted in some circumstances. Okay. Financial default, technical default on a HUD loan. There's other kinds of project defaults and things like that that you can get a default flag for. Here's the deal on the financial defaults. This flag will stay on your record for 10 years. 10 years. Okay? So you want to be really, really careful. I know you want to be really careful anyway because it's a financial matter and you don't want your properties to go in default, but please know that they, are required to stay on your flag report for 10 years. Does that mean that for 10 years you can't do any new business with HUD? Anybody? Of course you can, but it depends. What kind of business partner have you been? What are the circumstances around the default? Okay? When HUD places a flag, they also have the option behind the scenes in the IRM system where we don't get to see, to put in comments. So if the comments read, contacted this owner 8 times, unresponsive, you know, argumentative, those kinds of things, or owner contacted us 2 months in advance, indicated there were issues due to crime in the area and violence, residents moving out, feared for a financial default situation, worked with us, you know, on and on and on. It has that type of explanation in the system. Obviously, you're in a much better place. Okay. When a 2530 is getting reviewed at the local field office, if there's a flag that was placed in one of the other field offices, they have to kick that 2530 up to HUD headquarters. HUD headquarters will investigate the reasons behind the flags. We'll talk to the project managers that place the flags. We'll read those items in the back part of the system, and we'll make a determination. So there are certainly plenty of companies that have gotten new business with HUD with a flag on their record. It's just 100% easier if there aren't. There are some field offices that I will not name, and it's not New York. There are some field offices where they say, well, you know what, we have plenty of managers that have no flags, and so if they have any flags, we just don't want to do business with them. Okay? So you know, don't get too comfortable when I sit here and say, yes, you can get approved with flags on your record. You want to be careful. You don't ever want to put any of this stuff to chance. All right? Common misperceptions about flags, that HUD must remove a flag once you fix the problem. Not necessarily. Okay, the property belongs to the owner, so you get to call the shots. Have you ever heard someone at HUD say this is a HUD asset? If it's got a HUD component, they own you. Okay? There's some bad property owners out there that are just like, well, it's my property, I'll do what I want to do. Well, then you're not doing any new business with HUD. And if the HUD project manager says, hey, it's okay about that flag, I'll take care of it, follow up. You know, as I said earlier, they're very busy and got a lot of other stuff going on, so make sure that you follow up on that flag report. As I said, the biggest problem with flags is preventing you from taking on additional managed contracts, doing new business, refinancing the property. You have to just be really careful. Best practices, address your issues immediately, be proactive, have a good relationship with your HUD project manager. Okay? That's all I got.
Thank you, Denise. Just a couple of brief comments from my perspective, which would be from the perspective of the consultant and also presumably or hopefully your perspective as well as a non-attorney. We'll hear from the real expert from the attorney perspective in a few moments. One of the things which I look at, or which I always keep in mind, is that while flags have a special resonance, obviously, particularly that flag about non-compliance with just about anything that someone doesn't like you for, to me the issue is not so much if there's a flag, it's whether or not you're in good graces with your field office. To me, because there are plenty of times that we've seen where there is no flag, but the field office is denying the ability to do additional business, refusing to allow a management contract, something along that nature. There are three primary types of situations which we're cognizant of. The first, of course, is physical conditions. Now, that's not just a REACT score. We've seen people get into problems when they've purchased new properties or taken on the management of a troubled project, negotiated a workout deal with the field office, and then didn't comply with the time frames or the quality of work in the repair program. So it's not simply REACT that you want to watch out for. We've also seen situations where the field office got on a managing agent's back and threatened to refuse to do any new business with that managing agent because in a couple of projects there were, quote unquote, a lot of tenant complaints coming in. Now, whether the tenant complaints had validity or not was not the issue, and the HUD asset manager actually acknowledged that to me. It was simply there were a lot of complaints, so obviously the managing agent is doing something wrong. Secondly, there are the financial issues. We have improper distributions, equity skimming types of things, obviously. Questionable disbursements. If HUD has some questions about how you're spending the money, that probably won't result in a flag, but it is going to raise a lot of questions in their mind. Some project managers do look at financial statements. Sometimes you're required to do monthly reports of the things. Don't think that HUD doesn't look at those things. They usually do. And finally, you have management failures, just general management failures. Could be something as serious as a site manager playing with a waiting list. It could be something as simple as a failed management review. So how do you address all of these problems? From our perspective, and this is all pretty obvious, I think. If you do become aware of something, don't ignore it. Fix it immediately. Even if that fix requires you to talk to the HUD field manager and bring the issue to light, because sometimes that is necessary. If that's the case, the way I would look at it is better I frame the issue than have them discover it and have them frame the issue. We've found many, many times, the vast majority of cases, even if there's a serious problem, if HUD was not aware of it, and the owner is the one that brings it to the attention of the field office, with the fix in mind, or whatever it might be, showing them a plan to fix it, a realistic plan, or actually having fixed it, no flag is issued. And actually, the managing agent usually gets a pat on the head from HUD. They like that. If you get a REACT score less than 60, Denise touched on that. It's not an automatic flag. What you should do, besides looking at the appeal, is immediately, if you think that there's any compelling reason why the project really is a decent project, or there's compelling reason why there was a problem, talk to the field office immediately. The HUD director does have the discretion not to put a flag on. Some HUD directors are very reluctant to do that, to not put the flag on. Other HUD directors, and we're lucky enough in New York to have one, are very realistic about these things and will work with you if there are problems. So go to your field office immediately if you fail, if you have any kind of argument as to why that failure does not really represent the quality of your project. Final comment, when you're dealing with HUD, a couple of golden rules that we have when we're dealing with flags or any kind of problems. The first is, don't assume that HUD is stupid. They're not. The HUD folks do usually know their business. But the second rule is kind of the opposite, and that is, don't assume that the HUD folks always know all the rules. They don't always know all the rules. So you want to do your research before you go in. One quick example, we had a situation with a project that failed a management review. We went into the HUD field office. We took a look at all of the findings, and that project should not have failed the management review. Turned out that the HUD field office didn't do the scoring on the management review the way it's supposed to be done. There is a specific methodology they're supposed to follow. The field office actually acknowledged that they were unaware of that methodology. And that was 6 months after it was published. So on the one hand, don't assume they're stupid. Don't assume they're ill-willed, although there are some that are, but by and large, they're not. But also, don't assume automatically that when they recite a regulation, they're reciting it correctly. They may not be. Lisa?
Okay. So good morning, thanks for having us. As Denise mentioned, we are New Yorkers, so it's nice to be back in our city. And thanks for having me in particular. I know that when the attorney comes to see you, frequently this is everyone's perception. As I like to say, cue the funeral dirge. We're not the most loved people in the room, and I can appreciate that. We don't get no respect, and judging from some of my fellow colleagues, that's well earned. And then it's interesting, when we do call HUD, we do get respect, and sometimes it's just because, as Denise mentioned, we're kind of the last gasp attempt to save your property. You might be looking at a foreclosure, you might be looking at HUD taking away everything, threatening to report you to the Department of Justice. So my little friend here is going to show up when I think you need an attorney, but there are many, many instances when you don't need my services, and I completely understand not wanting to work with an attorney, not only because of the reputation and the message it sends HUD that, look, I really feel like I need to be protected here, but the cost. I totally understand that about the cost. But it is important to know when to use the lawyer stick, as I like to call it, and as David and Denise both mentioned, it's all about relationships. It's not about antagonizing people, at least that's the approach I take. My goal is to come to some kind of mediated response, and it does involve acknowledging, taking responsibility where mistakes were made, and saying, okay, that was the past, this is where we're moving in the future. So, we're all in this together, we're all about partnership, let's move forward, HUD. And aggressive doesn't always yield results, it's about knowing the process. I'm a former HUD person too, and I think that helps when I deal with HUD. Okay, flag resolution. Denise touched on this about who places and who resolves. It's worth going through briefly. Of course, we talked about the field office place flags. You can have the field office remove that, or if you have a situation where the field office is unwilling to work with you, you can go to headquarters, or you can go to the Multifamily Participation Review Committee if necessary. REACT, Denise mentioned the non-filing of the audited financial statements. That it can happen at the field office level, can be removed, also headquarters or the review committee. And finally, headquarters can place them in addition to her favorite flag, the non-compliance with any obligation. I've seen these placed if there's deck involvement, the deck has placed them itself, or the Office of Inspector General has said to housing, go ahead and put this on for us, because And at that point, your field office is pretty much powerless because it's at the headquarters level, so your only resolution is going to come at the headquarters level or the review committee. So the field office placed flags are generally the easiest to remove. When I say generally, this is a yellow flag for a reason. It's never, any kind of flag is never a picnic. But there are reasons that the field office should get involved, and as we've been mentioning over and over, and as you're probably well familiar with, is your relationships really do matter. This staff has a moderate amount of discretion about whether to place a flag at all or not. In, I think it was 2004, there was a memorandum that came out of headquarters that defined a critical finding as pretty much everything short of sneezing. The below average MORs was on there, and a lot of us in the industry said, HUD, really? This is critical? I mean, what about our partnership here? But I think at that time, the view in headquarters was, they're pretty draconian. So I think we've moved away from that somewhat, but it's hard to change old attitudes. As Denise mentioned, and David as well, you may need to get the field offices talking to one another, and that's why the memorandum, the notes that are in the HUD system behind the scenes that we can't see are really important. So it's good to know just how's that, what's going on in Florida, what's going on in Indiana, what's going on in California, and you might have to get on the phone and call, California and say, could you talk to Indiana about this, or can you talk to the New York office, or they're confused about what happened over there, particularly if you have new people coming into your organization and so forth, who are bringing flags from another jurisdiction. So if the field office can't review, it goes up to Headquarters Policy Participation Standards Division, also known as PPSD. The regulations provide they have at least 30 days to clear. Typically this takes longer, in my experience, unfortunately, particularly now that their staff is relatively small. That hasn't changed and not likely to get any better in this current budget environment. And again, as we mentioned, they're going to have to consult with the office that placed the flag, and those people might be on vacation, and now with the shutdown, things are going to take much longer to resolve. The regulations provide they have limited approval and disapproval powers, so their hands are literally tied at some point, and there's a limit to what they can and cannot do, so it might have to get kicked up the stream, which we'll talk about in a moment. What I find is you can't always rely on someone has said to you in an email, oh, that's fine, I'm going to take care of that. I'm big about getting everything in writing. You can't always get a letter from HUD, but you can get an email at least. You may have to send that email along and say, yes, this field office in Indiana acknowledges that we took care of that problem, that there was a default. We, the owner, put in a lot of money, or we put in our own time on this. We kicked out the old management agent, so on and so forth. So it's always good to document the proactive steps that the good guy that you're representing is trying to take. As I mentioned, when the PPSD division's hands are tied, they have the capacity to refer things up to the committee. Sometimes they do this, or just it's a close call. They just don't feel comfortable, so they'll send those things up to the Multifamily Participation Review Committee, also known as MPRC. By regulations, these are the folks, and we don't really know who they are because the regulations define who sits on this committee, but as Denise mentioned, they're way out of date. But they're empowered to act on behalf of the FHA Commissioner and also PIH, the Assistant Secretary. Their purpose is to review all of the applications that come in for consideration, and they have to look at the entire record. And I really want to emphasize that because when I get involved, usually HUD's got a viewpoint. It's really upset with whoever's before them, and I need to show them it's not all black and white, it's certainly not all black, here's some good stuff, and here's what you need to consider. So it's the entire record that's relevant. And I also sometimes have to expand HUD's viewpoint. They're looking at a narrow slice in time. I need to say, this has been a 20-year partner of yours. Let's look at all the great stuff they've done. They hit a rough patch, and here's what happened here, and here's how we're moving forward. So it's important to emphasize the entire record when dealing with this division. And because they're focusing on conditions that are legally attributable to the principals, that's when you need my friend. Or not necessarily, but it's a good idea to seek legal counsel, because these are legal issues, and the decisions of this committee could have some pretty good ramifications, pretty serious ones. So with that in mind, they, again, by regulation, meet only periodically. Generally, every 6 weeks. We have occasionally seen them kick in and meet more regularly, sort of coming to the end of the calendar year or the fiscal year. It doesn't happen very often, but it's just when you're in this mode, when you're up at the committee level, just count on more time. So it's important to get your applications in early in case you end up at the committee level, particularly if you know you've got a flag report with a number of issues on it, and you're going to need time to explain this. As as I mentioned, they look at the entire record, so that means they're not gonna just look at the bad stuff. I always make them focus on the mitigating and the extenuating circumstances that are really beyond the owner's or the agent's control, such as financial conditions of the property, or the surrounding market, if the occupancy took a nosedive, or if crime ramped up, or something like that, and there wasn't enough police presence to deal with that. And the committee, unfortunately, I've seen this a number of times, could decide it needs more information, which takes more time. So you may go to committee, let's say you just put in the application before the committee, they don't meet for another 5 weeks. 5 weeks come around, they meet, takes them a day or two to send you the email or the letter that says, we need more time or we need more information. Well, then you're looking at another 6 weeks until the committee meets again. So bear that in mind. I've seen it happen, unfortunately. They have 4 options, basically. They can give you a thumbs up approval, they can conditionally approve, which means we'll allow you to come in and manage, but maybe for a year, and we're gonna watch you and see how you do, and we may pull that approval if you're not performing up to our standards, or there may be other conditions. I've had them approve individuals with the understanding that there's a third party who's engaged at the expense of that individual to sort of look over their shoulder and make sure they're doing everything right, and to give regular updates to HUD saying, you know, I agree with this is appropriate. Or they can disapprove. And this is never really the end, it's never the closing of the door. As the applicant, you can always request reconsideration of any adverse decision. So if you don't like that conditional approval, you don't like the idea of someone looking over your shoulder, of course it's risky to do this, you can say to HUD, would you look at this again? Because then you're looking at another 6-week, 12-week cycle perhaps as they reconsider everything. So everything is about checks and balances, or I mean, the pluses and minuses of making those determinations. You can also request a hearing before an administrative law judge. This is where your expenses and time really go up, though, unfortunately, because that's a whole legal process. That's one step below the district court, and as an administrative agency, you're required to go through the administrative adjudication process before you can get to court. So you can't just say to HUD, well, I'm going to sue you. HUD doesn't, the regulations provide, and we hope this stays in the regulations, because one of the things they tried to do when HUD tried to rewrite the 25-30-year regulations a few years ago is take away the ability to petition for an ALJ hearing. So, and the ALJ, although it's a HUD judge, is supposed to be an impartial neutral party. I know I'm going through this rather fast. So. There are some roadblocks to approval, unfortunately. If you have an IG audit or investigation going on, does everybody know the difference between an audit and an investigation? An audit basically is when they're looking at your processes. It's not a criminal investigation. It has no kind of criminal focus on it. Investigation, on the other hand, is exactly that, where the Department of Justice might be involved. You've got the IG involved in looking at a property or an owner or a project. Nothing's getting approved on 2530s, unfortunately.
Lisa, I apologize. What is OIG?
Office of Inspector General.
Thank you.
Sure, no problem. Talking in code here. Similarly, LDP, which stands for Limited Denials of Participation, and Suspension and Debarment, which are more serious sanctions that HUD could use against a bad owner or a manager or whoever. Those are the sanctions that come at the time. Limited denial of participation is done at the field office level. It usually involves an administrative process where you're told you basically can't do business in, let's say, New York or New Jersey or whatever for 5 years or something like that, or 3 years. Actually, it's a 1-year period, but I've seen HUD try to ramp it up. Suspension and debarment are for serious instances of noncompliance and violations. But these are unfortunately going to hold up, if not stop, at 2530. So some of the flags that I'm going to run through quickly are the unauthorized transfer of physical assets, unresolved audit findings, which David mentioned, mortgage assignment or default, and our favorite, the noncompliance with any HUD obligation. So the unauthorized TPA, as you know, your regulatory agreement requires that HUD consent before there's any kind of transfer of the FHA property. Now, obviously, if you're going to sell the property and transfer the mortgage, that's going to go through what's the full transfer of physical assets process. But people aren't necessarily aware of all the little nuances of other ownership changes you could do, even as simple as changing 50% of the interest in the stock. Or any kind of interest in the property that can trigger what's called a modified TPA. And so people will make these changes, they'll sell some stock, or they'll have some kind of estate planning, or the children will be brought in, and HUD will all of a sudden say, you didn't ask us if you could do this. And they think this is an estate planning technique, we really shouldn't have to get your approval. But as Denise mentioned, it's a HUD asset, so they're gonna take a very broad view of what they can and cannot control. And this is it can be a challenging flag to get rid of because it kind of implies that you don't care what HUD thinks about their oversight role, And if you're not going to pay that close attention and provide them with the information necessary to approve the incoming children or whoever, then they're really going to be wary of doing future business with you. So this is a pretty serious flag to run into. Similarly, substitution of one or more general partners is considered a modified TPA. And then my personal favorite is any other transaction resulting in a change of control. So it can be very broad and open to HUD interpretation about what that means. And I've seen HUD look very closely at incremental 10% changes in ownership done over a period of time that could trigger that 50% rule. So before you're thinking of making any kind of changes like this, it'd be a good idea to get counsel to sort of advise, how do we go about this so that we're on the same page with HUD, particularly if you have flags already. Just want to coordinate your response and your approach with the government. Unresolved audit findings, these are generally generated by REACT's review of the financial statements. Sorry. They may involve referral to the Departmental Enforcement Center, and I don't know if you're familiar with the sort of the 3 levels of review that the Enforcement Center does. The first is you can get an email from your project manager saying, you know, I have a couple questions about this distribution, can you provide more information, and so forth. The second is the letter that you would get from your project manager, and the third would be the certified letter that comes from the Enforcement Center, which is pretty much giving you a certain amount of time to respond, and it's a bit more serious and so forth. And at this point, if the Enforcement Center is involved, the field offices basically, not necessarily willfully, but they're required by the way HUD systems are set up, handed off responsibility to the Enforcement Center to resolve this issue. So you're now communicating, you have to keep in touch with your field office, which is important for relationship purposes, but you're now at the deck level, and you have to work with the Enforcement Center to resolve this audit finding before any kind of flag can be lifted and so forth. So it's important to answer all of their inquiries by the specific deadlines. Now, they'll ask for 1 million pieces of paper sometimes and give you 30 days to respond, and it's okay to ask for an extension because sometimes those deadlines are just not realistic. But just keep in mind that those deadlines are real, and if you can't meet them, to communicate why and to work as quickly as you can to get there. I always think it's never okay to assume that if you send everything into HUD and 60 days go by, which is never, you always want to follow up. But 60 days go by and you haven't heard anything, you can't necessarily assume that everything's great and they've cleared your problem. I always insist on at least an email from HUD saying, yes, we received this, and thank you, this resolves it, because then you can show that to your project manager and say, please lift my flag. Because as Denise mentioned, you don't necessarily get the flags lifted just because you've resolved the issues. So if you can't get a closeout letter from HUD, definitely insist on an email. Mortgage default, assignment, or workout. As we've all mentioned, it's important to demonstrate proactivity on the behalf of the principals who are involved. So this involves showing that the principals maybe made some financial contributions of their own, came out of pocket, which brings up another point. You're not required under the HUD requirements rules to get pre-approval to make an equity contribution. I think it's a good idea because if you ever want to get that money back from HUD, they would say, well, you didn't get our approval to put this money in. We don't acknowledge that it's coming out of your cash, even though you could show us the check and the transfer that went into the operating fund and so forth. Without our approval, you can't necessarily get that out when the project's doing well again, or if you refinance, or if you sell it. So, or actually, it's not until you sell it you can actually see that. So it's important to make sure HUD is always aware of what you're doing. Say, look, as Denise mentioned, or was it David who said, there's a problem coming in a couple of months, we may not be able to make payroll, so we're concerned about the mortgage payments and so forth. So stay in touch with HUD for that purpose so that they know what's coming up, and then you can demonstrate, look, this is all the steps we took to make sure the project did not go into default, but it was really unappropriate given the circumstances. Also, similarly, I mentioned earlier that one of the things would be good to show, because if you're a limited partner, sometimes you obviously don't have that kind of day-to-day control. There might be a provision in your operating partnership to allow you to exercise that kind of control and say, look, we're falling into financial default here. We have some major ramifications and consequences that could come from HUD. We're going to kick out the management company. We think they're the problem. So if you can show that the limited partner who had no control in causing the default is trying to actively mitigate it and is trying to be more hands-on, that's all a plus. And as I mentioned, refinancing is also helpful to show that, the current debt service is unsustainable. Here's what we've tried to do, but how we could use your help. Sometimes if you get on board and say, we're gonna approve some new financing, that'll get the bank to kick in the money. So it's all part of a larger collective effort. Non-compliance with any HUD obligation, as we mentioned, it's a big catch-all category. We have seen it come up with increasing frequency. As we mentioned, it's important to talk to the field ops and find out really what's the underlying issue here, because there's really no way of knowing unless you ask. And I've seen it used for open Office of Inspector General and DEC investigations. And it's really important to sort of build a narrative explaining the situation from your point of view, because HUD, again, and by the time people come to me, HUD has a very ingrained view frequently of what's gone wrong here. And it's important to show it's really not always like that. Here's all the positive stuff you may not have heard about, because we have a, believe it or not, a modest owner, a modest management agent. I once had a client who, out of the goodness of his own heart, did not, he was managing a cooperative, and he was concerned, it was in a very low income area, he did not want to encourage the ownership to raise rents because he knew they couldn't afford it, and a number of them were gonna have to leave, so he would just defer his management fee, and then when he went to refinance the property, there was something like $50,000 or $500,000, it was a huge number of overdue made payables, and HUD just did not believe that he actually had done that, because he had not told HUD, like, I'm not taking management fees, so on and so forth. The long story was, or short story, we had to hire an independent CPA to come in and audit his books and pretty much confirm, yes, these are legitimate payables that are owed. So it's always important to keep the good news flowing to HUD, so that when you come in with a bad news story, you've built up that goodwill. I know I went really fast, but is there any questions or topics? We'll open it up now. So.
Yeah, I'd just like to make one or two comments before we open it up. The first is just to underline the concepts that both Lisa and Denise mentioned, and that is to be proactive. Don't be afraid to look at what's going on. Be honest with yourself as to what the potential problems are. None of you, or by and large, most of you, are not the ones who actually work the secure systems in your offices. You have staff that does that. Make sure your staff, if you do it yourself in-house, make sure your staff does check the apps reports, the flags reports regularly. Flags do get posted, as Denise said, without you knowing it. So you want to make sure you're aware of it. If you're having any problems with the secure systems, or if you just don't want to be bothered with it at all, talk to Denise. She knows how to do it. This is what she does, and she can help you with any problems with those systems. Similarly, if there are issues, while certainly there are issues that you can handle yourself, where you do not need an attorney, recognize there are issues where you do need an attorney. And I'd like to thank both of these ladies for coming up here. Lisa is at the top of the list as far as I'm concerned, for who I would refer someone to if I feel that one of my clients has a situation which should be handled at the legal level.